Welcome to the 4R webinar, Intelligent Inventory Optimization Best Practices, Seasonal Allocation. This presentation will be about 30 minutes long, including a question and answer session at the end. During the presentation, if you have questions, please type them into the chat feature on the right-hand side of your screen. A recording of this webinar will be available on our website, 4rsystems.com, following the presentation. And now I will hand it over to our presenter, Nina Shivaroli.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Nina Shivaroli. I'm the Director of Customer Success at 4R. And in today's webinar, my goal for you is to understand the best practices to better forecast the seasonal products and mitigate the negative impacts of common unknown factors, such as the impact of location within the country and the timing of season changes. I'm first going to go over the current state and briefly reflect on what some of the big box retailers are facing right now with excess inventory. Then I'm going to recap what the typical approaches are when planning for an upcoming season and the challenges that come along with them. And finally, I'm going to provide a few best practices that will help maximize your sell-through and prevent the need for aggressive markdowns that are needed to address excess and stranded inventory by using a blended forecast method that looks at multiple years of history and also uses a read and react approach. To kick it off, I'd like to refer to a recent article posted in the Wall Street Journal that describes the current state for some of the top retailers. As far as the current state of inventory trends, I'm sure you're familiar with one of the many articles recently published on excess inventory at Target, but I'm referring to an article that was posted in the Wall Street Journal on June 6th called Surplus Inventory Piles Up in Stores as Spending Shifts. This article summarizes a year-over-year comparison of the first quarter inventory and sales for several big box retailers such as Ross Stores, Walmart, Kohl's, and Target, along with a few more. These retailers experienced strong sales during the pandemic in certain areas such as activewear and home goods. And with the supply chain issues and difficulty moving goods, they ordered earlier and even extra in some cases to prepare for similar demand in 2022 to mitigate any continued issues with the supply chain. This may seem like a good approach, but the challenge with relying on a longer lead time of forecasts is that it is very dependent on the trends happening at that time and doesn't consider that trends may be different in the new year. There is a variability that needs to be accounted for. Now that the world is opening up and consumers have savings from either being home or from stimulus checks, they're shifting their buying patterns to experiences and travel. Coupled with inflation, consumers are placing priority on buying necessities such as food and fuel, as opposed to the discretionary items such as apparel and home goods. This is causing the inventory to pile up for these retailers, since they are unable to react to the quicker than expected shift in demand trends and the higher cost. Based on this article, some of them are even sitting on 35% or more inventory at cost as compared to the previous year. This brings me to the topic of this webinar, the importance to utilizing a read and react approach, especially in your seasonal product categories, along with an intelligent software that analyzes more than 1 year to predict the need for the upcoming year. Meaning the last year isn't always a reliable predictor of the next year, and more than 1 year should be evaluated to determine how variable a particular product category can be. No one can predict the future, but a combination of cross-validation and a read and react approach can help to minimize the undesirable effects of only using the latest year of sales. Let's review the common planning method we see among retailers. Typically, preparation for an upcoming season, such as back to school, we see retailers buy a lump sum of product and distribute the vast majority of it out to the stores immediately, based on a forecast from the previous year's sales. There's a few problems with this approach. The last year isn't always normal or reliable for total demand and the timing of when that demand is going to occur. And this also leaves little flexibility to react to changing trends. If most inventory was allocated to the store based on last year's sales, and there is a shift in where the demand is occurring, the inventory could be in the wrong place. This leaves less product available to send out to the stores that are performing stronger than historically seen, creating higher loss margin. Or said a different way, too much product is sitting at the previously top performing stores, creating lower sell-through and stranded inventory. Perhaps the product can be transferred to other stores, but there's costs associated with the shipping and handling. This can also leave less product available for e-commerce and would lead to lost sales in the case consumer preference shifts to online buying. Sales patterns are changing, obviously, and if we don't allow some time to observe current sales, we could be in for a very costly season. Those challenges are further magnified when we take into consideration some of the more broad challenges, such as supply chain issues, inflation, and labor shortage that we're seeing now. This is leading retailers to follow more of the thought process on this slide. We had a high-performing year during 2021 and could have performed even better if we could get the inventory in time. In efforts to avoid stockouts, I want to mitigate the effect of any potential supply chain issues by planning early and ordering a little more. This will give my vendors more time to plan for the quantity needed and deliver the product to me in time for my season. I'll order a little more to cushion the quantities in case the supply chain shortage continues. So now they have ordered more inventory earlier and based on an abnormal sales year where sales were high in items more fitting for the work from home lifestyle, and when the supply chain was experiencing significant delays. And now they're at a significant disadvantage, and I'll explain why in the next few slides. Supply chain issues are diminishing and consumer demand is shifting. So what happens when these vendors do deliver and to the full amount and maybe even backfill some of those previous orders? Overstock. Think about all of the articles on Target and how much excess inventory they're sitting on in areas demand was high when people were working from home, and how consumers can now expect to see pervasive markdowns in the coming weeks at Target. Worse so, overstock with inflated prices. So now the consumer is less likely to even buy the product since it's more expensive. Now the retailer is sitting on higher costs of inventory, even if by some chance the total units are comparable year over year. Then layer in labor shortage, and the inventory isn't where it should be due to the employees and limited number of employees tending to the customers and other operational tasks. This could result in the inventory getting lost in the back room and just not being visible to the customer. This all leads to more frequent markdowns to drive sell-through. Due to inflation, we're seeing the demand shift to necessities, so retailer needs some way to prompt the consumer to buy the extra bathing suit cover-up this season. Markdowns are also required to reduce stranded inventory and excess inventory due to the pile-up from the aggressive push methods and the forecast built on an abnormal year. Now that assumes the vendor can deliver, but the supply chain issues haven't fully been resolved everywhere. So what happens when these vendors can't meet the order quantities and leave the retailer in a constrained inventory situation? Now the retailer has to choose how to divvy up the inventory amongst their stores. Typically, the method is to prioritize the higher volume stores, but this actually can create a similar set of challenges, such as stranded inventory in those stores that performed well last year, but aren't performing this year. And even if the retailer has ability to transfer inventory, they are left with the costly store transfers to the stores that are selling. This method can also leave less inventory for e-commerce sales and can create lost sales and stockouts in the stores that are selling better this year. So both scenarios, whether the retailer is slightly overstocked or slightly understocked in their inventory, require a better approach. So what are some of the best practices you can apply to achieve an ideal planning approach and be able to handle as many unpredictable scenarios as possible? First, consider more than 1 year of history when forecasting for the upcoming season. Sales patterns change, whether it's due to weather, pandemics, or inflation. Second, that tool should also automatically adjust to the current sales and react to trends happening now. Third, it should also look at each SKU store differently. Every SKU store has different characteristics, and service levels miss the mark. Lastly, consider a forecast blend, meaning we need an initial forecast based on more history, but as sales accumulate, shifting that dependence onto actual sales for the current season is key. I'm going to break down the importance of each of these in a little more detail in the next few slides. The first best practice, using a multi-year approach when looking at history. To generate the initial forecast, yes, we need to leverage historical sales, especially since we are usually allocating brand new products, but we can't just look at 1 year. We need a multi-year approach to observe the behavior of sales year over year. The last year could have had anomalies, such as weather trends and supply chain issues, which impacts the timing and the level of sales differently when compared to previous years. See the image to the right. This chart represents sales for lawn and garden product line in 2 different years. The demand for both is 3,620 units, but the period of sales differs, likely due to the timing of when summer weather really kicked in. The forecast tool should recognize this variability and find middle ground when developing the seasonality for the upcoming period. Cross-validation is needed to understand how predictable a season is from 1 year to another and at what level sales may be more variable, whether it's product hierarchy, store grouping, or a mixture of both. This knowledge can be used to incorporate a level of variability and also to break up the level at which you should plan your forecasts. This way you get a shape and volume specific to that product group, store group, or product store group. For example, to the right here, you see that the timing for the start of sales is the same for this particular product line, but the shape of demand differs among store groups. When a forecast is generated for this product line, the store group should be split to get the most accurate forecast. So best practice 2 and 3 are similar, but we're going to start with number 2, which is the read and react flexibility. Your solution needs the ability to observe current sales and have intelligence to adjust accordingly. These adjustments could be in cases where sales are not realized on the start date, whether it's the lawnmowers and it's a prolonged winter. That tool needs to push that demand back and shift the level of forecasts accordingly. Or if it's the brick and mortar stores, sales are trending down while the internet sales are trending up as compared to the previous year, the tool should realize it needs to hold back more inventory for those increasing internet sales. Automated reaction is key as well, especially in this world when we're facing all of these labor shortages. Catching and adjusting to trends takes up time and usually leverages a service level method or a gut feeling, which can just cause more problems. Automating this process frees up the time for your employees to better utilize their skill set and focus on strategic initiatives, and just leaves them with one less thing to worry about. In the image to the left, we are looking at lawn and garden products split among 3 store groups: South, North, and Central. And here you will see the northern stores see more seasonality during April to September months, while Central and South are a little flatter throughout the year, aside from their peaks. The northern stores are actually the lowest in January and February, but as sales rise in March, the forecast should adjust that trend and shift more need to the northern stores. Best practice number 3. So once the inventory is available to be allocated to the stores, each store should be treated uniquely. Different footprints, different locations, and demographics drive different sales patterns in the same products. So even the initial allocations should consider that store's unique selling characteristics. The chart to the right shows 6 clusters of stores for products and back to school supplies. You'll notice that the peak demand is almost the same level for each group, but the timing of when that peak occurs is what differs. Depending where the stores are located, school begins at different times of the year and should be considered in your allocation model to ensure the inventory is in those stores in time for its specific peak demand. That said, there is a balance that needs to be achieved when allocating. We need to supply the stores to minimize lost sales, but still leave enough inventory in the DC or fulfillment center to not only have flexibility to allocate differently to the brick and mortar stores as the season progresses, but to also be able to fulfill direct demand, especially when inventory is constrained. Pushing inventory to the highest volume stores is not always ideal. We need to look at the total need across all stores and the internet compared to the remaining season forecast and allocate intelligently. By using a model that measures the likelihood of the store selling that particular unit over the coverage period, we can understand whether it makes sense to push that unit now or hold on to it and reevaluate in the next run after we've accumulated more sales history. This way, we don't risk misallocating the constrained inventory to the stores that don't really need it, either because they have enough to cover the current coverage period, or based on recent sales trend, are very unlikely to sell whatever additional inventory could be pushed out. Lastly, best practice number 4, in using a blend of forecast methods. Like I said earlier, the initial forecast needs something to be based on, especially since new products are usually released. The first piece of the forecast blend is a static forecast, because it's based on history from the previous year. That historic sales demand creates the base for the timing, shape, and volume of demand expected to occur over the upcoming season for similar products. Then a shift needs to happen. As sales are realized, the forecast should be blended between historical predictions and true trend. Trend is changing, as we are clearly seeing in the articles around the big box stores. This brings me to the short-term dynamic piece of the forecast blend. Demand is shifting from athletic and leisure apparel to business casual and dressy as consumers return to work and other social activities, and that the forecast needs to account for that shift. This is why we emphasize the importance of not allocating all the inventory at once. Yes, We need to allocate enough to the stores to minimize lost sales, but we need to hold enough back to be able to adjust to where the demand is occurring now. As the season progresses, the forecast should rely more and more on actual sales and less on the static forecast. But now we need to consider that the end of season is approaching, bringing me to the last piece, the long-term dynamic forecast. Long-term dynamic is still reactive, but also considers the season-to-date demand and the percent of season completed. As the season approaches the end of its life, we should consider the likelihood that inventory will sell once it is in the stores, given the amount of time left in the season, and allocate accordingly. Meaning, even if we are in the middle of an upward trend or peak seasonality, if the end of season is approaching, those orders may need to drop to ensure the inventory that arrives in the store has a high probability of sale before the season ends. This is a tricky task. Obviously, you don't want to be left with inventory in the DC at the end of season, but you also need time to read sales to understand the most profitable stores to send that inventory to, but not delay too long that could cause inventory to arrive late in the stores and require markdowns. This blending method provides a more intricate approach to optimizing the data available at the time of allocation. In the beginning of the season, all you have is the previous years, so use that. As sales accumulate, let's gradually layer in that trend on top of what we have seen in the past. Let's observe sales in each store and reevaluate that store's selling strength of the products in the current year and adjust the forecast appropriately. This way, changes in consumer behaviors or weather patterns or the effect of inflation is captured in the sales, and the retailer can react to the trends happening now. So long story short, as the season progresses, let's rely more on the current year and less on the previous, but not lose sight of the end date. So in summary, last year's sales are not enough, intuition is not enough, service levels are not enough to try and predict the current year's sales. In order to avoid the inventory issues and markdown requirements that Target is seeing along with the other retailers in the news, you need a more intelligent tool that automatically evaluates the predictability of demand, accounts for variance, and can dynamically react to the ever-changing demand patterns all the way down to the SKU store level. That's all I have for today, so thank you for tuning in. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Nina. Actually, a couple questions have come through. The first one, you mentioned leveraging multiple years of history when creating an initial forecast, but the last 2 years are very abnormal. So how would you determine what years should be used when determining the forecast for the upcoming season?
Okay, so my answer to that would be, it depends. In times like this, when 2021 and 2020 are really abnormal, it may make sense to look at 2019 and 2021 since there were shutdowns in a portion of 2020. Or it could make sense to omit 2020 and 2021 completely and look at the years prior, but incorporate a level of trend to account for any growth or decline that specific retailer has seen in the specific product line or channel. Meaning, one of the good things coming out of the pandemic is that a lot of retailers are seeing increased internet sales. So perhaps when looking at 2018 and 2019 to make your predictions, you can consider a trend factor to ensure the internet forecasts are higher overall. Maybe leave the shape of that demand alone, but raise expectations as far as the volume goes based on how trends are looking right now. As an employee of 4R, we have a really strong understanding of what is going on in the retail world, but we also realize none of our retailers are the same. So we try and cater our analyses to the characteristics of the customers we are projecting for. We meet on a weekly basis with our clients and always prefer to hear and possibly integrate any insights they may have where it makes sense, since they obviously know their business best. And this only helps make our math even better. So yeah, our math is great already, but any other insights, we do always take advice from our customers where we can.
Okay, great. And one more. I understand ideally we need some time to observe current sales trends, but my vendors require order forecasts 6 months out. So I don't have time to wait for current sales. Otherwise, I risk not ordering and seeing no sales. What would you suggest there?
That's a good question, and that's a valid point. This is actually a very common characteristic of our clients' vendors as well, and I can understand that even sometimes they even require more than 6 months out, but that again goes back to why we recommend using more than 1 year of history when projecting forward. So if we look at 2, 3, or even 4 years of history, we can identify the commonalities in the shape of demand. And we can also see if a certain product line is trending up, down, or maybe it's just the same as years are going by. And then we can also identify if 1 year is not like the others, and then omit completely. So putting that in terms of today, if we had forecasted for Target, let's say, we would have advised not to use 2021 as a model year for 2022, as I'm confident that the sales in 2021 are not like the others in both volume and shape timing of demand.
Okay, that's it for questions. Thank you everyone for your time. That concludes our presentation for today. A recording of this webinar will soon be available on our website and YouTube page. Thank you for attending and have a great day.